Night falls over Nashville. The Grand Ole Opry goes dark. A lone microphone stands still on the old wooden stage. No more music, only a deep silence, like someone, somewhere, is still keeping time in the dark. The Statler brothers had 4 voices, but the foundation, the force that kept every harmony from ever falling apart, came from one low, resonant tone: Harold Reid. He stood behind the lights, yet he was the reason the group stood firm. On stage, he made the audience laugh. Off stage, he mended the cracks no one else could see. When a member faltered, when endless tours drained their spirits, when applause no longer felt warm, it was Harold who brought everything back into rhythm. From Flowers on the Wall to the Hall of Fame, from the early years touring with Johnny Cash to their farewell night in 2002, there lies an untold story. Why did the man who rarely stood in the spotlight become the irreplaceable soul of the group? Where did that bass voice come from? Who taught him to hold an entire brotherhood together, with nothing but laughter and calm? Let's return to Staunton, Virginia, where a boy named Harold learned how to make music stand steady before it ever learned how to soar. Harold Wilson Reid was born on August 21, 1939, in the small town of Staunton, Virginia, where green hills stretched endlessly toward the horizon. It was the gentle heartland of post-war America, where each morning carried the sound of church bells, the scent of freshly baked bread, and gospel hymns drifting from an old radio. In a corner of a modest church, young Harold would often stand quietly in the back row, his voice deeper, earthier, as if it carried the soil of his homeland. The Reid family wasn't wealthy, but they were rich in faith and closeness. His parents believed that if their children could sing and pray, they would never lose their way. The church became Harold's first classroom. There, he learned how to listen, how to blend his voice with others, instead of trying to rise above them. Those early hymns taught Harold that music wasn't just sound. It was a way to touch the human heart. In their small home in Staunton, every evening, Harold and his younger brother Don Reid sat beside a kerosene lamp, singing the gospel songs they heard on the radio. They had no microphone, only faith and a shared love of music. Harold had no idea that those peaceful nights would become the foundation of a sacred brotherhood in music, one that would last their entire lives. As a teenager, Harold was captivated by the voices of Hank Williams, Ernest Tubb, and the country bands that filled Southern radio waves. But what he loved most was the stillness of gospel singing, where every note carried humility and faith. That's what shaped his style, a warm, truthful bass voice, born of the American South, and a heart that always placed the listener's feeling above the glare of the stage lights. From Staunton, where the red clay mingled with his voice, Harold Reid stepped into life carrying only 3 things: faith, brotherhood, and the longing to carry his hometown song to the world. He couldn't have imagined that little more than a decade later, that same voice would echo across America. Alongside a group of friends called the Statler Brothers. In the early 1950s, Staunton, Virginia, was still a small town where everyone knew each other by name. Amid that quiet world, Harold Reid, a tall young man with a deep bass voice, began to dream of forming a singing group of his own. Not for fame, but to bring the warmth of church music closer to everyday life. As natural as a breath, as gentle as a smile. In 1955, Harold and 3 friends, Phil Balsley, Lew DeWitt, and later Don Reid, formed a small singing group called the Kingsmen. They sang in churches, fairs, weddings, anywhere there was an audience. There were no managers, no professional sound systems, only 4 voices and 1 old guitar. Their pay was sometimes just enough for a single hamburger split 4 ways, but the joy, they each carried plenty of that in their hearts. After a few years, they changed their name to the Statler Brothers, a name that seemed accidental, inspired by a box of Statler tissues they saw in a hotel. Harold often joked, "If we'd picked a different brand, we might have been the Kleenex Brothers." That humor was pure Harold. Gentle, clever, and as effortless as breathing. Through the 1960s, the group toured across the South, singing in old theaters, community halls, and sometimes to only a handful of listeners. Harold did everything: planning routes, driving the van, cracking jokes between songs to keep spirits high. He understood that the road to music wasn't just about bright lights. It was about patience and faith, night after night, mile after dusty mile. And then one day, destiny knocked. At a show in Lexington, Johnny Cash, the man in black, heard them sing. Cash invited the group to join his tour, making them his opening act for nearly 8 years. It was the first great turning point in Harold Reid's life. From small-town fairs, the Statler Brothers rose to the grandest stages in America, the Grand Ole Opry, carrying with them Harold's rich bass voice and the easy laughter of the Southern heartland. But glory never comes by luck alone. After years of standing behind Johnny Cash, Harold knew it was time for them to tell their own story. And then, in one single moment, when a song called "Flowers on the Wall" rang out in 1965, the entire country music world paused to listen. In 1965, Nashville blazed with the light of a new era in country music. On the radio, amid hundreds of hits spinning through the airwaves, a strange tune appeared, sad yet witty, melancholic yet irresistibly catchy. That song was "Flowers on the Wall," and that was the moment the Statler Brothers stepped into the light. "Flowers on the Wall" quickly climbed into the top 5 of the Billboard Hot 100 and earned a Grammy Award in 1966 for Best Contemporary Performance. 4 men from the small town of Staunton, Virginia, suddenly became a national phenomenon. Don Reid was the storyteller voice. Lew DeWitt brought the elegance of harmony, Phil Balsley anchored the mid-range, and Harold Reid, with that bass voice deep as the earth itself, was the foundation that held every note steady. On stage, Harold didn't just sing. He carried the emotional rhythm, the laughter between the ballads. When the audience grew too sentimental, he made them laugh. When the mood grew heavy, he lifted it again with a single well-timed joke. That effortless humor made people love him as much as they loved the music itself. Don Reid once said, "Without Harold, we were just 4 singers. With Harold, we were a family." From the late 1960s through the 1970s, the Statler Brothers entered their golden era. Hit after hit followed. "Do You Remember These?" 1972. "Class of '57, 1973, earning their 2nd Grammy. "Bed of Roses," 1970, along with a string of Southern-tinged ballads filled with nostalgia, humor, and heart. On television, they appeared in neatly pressed striped suits, smiling under studio lights. But what audiences remembered most was Harold Reid. That subtle grin, that mischievous sparkle in his eyes, and a voice that could both tease and comfort in the same breath. By the 1980s, the group had their own television program, The Statler Brothers Show on TNN, which became the most watched country music show in America for 7 consecutive years, 1991, 1998. Harold wrote skits, arranged comedy bits, and shaped the show's signature charm, a blend of music, storytelling, and laughter that felt like coming home. He turned every performance into a family gathering where joy and tears flowed together like verses of the same song. But no glory lasts forever. When laughter echoes too long, people sometimes forget that behind the stage lights are real human beings, tired, anxious, and at times, lonely. For Harold Reid, the years of triumph also brought pressure, loss, and quiet pain. That was when the spotlight began to reveal the unseen corners of his soul. The stage lights still blazed. The audience still laughed. But behind the curtain, Harold Reid knew the truth. Not every night ended with applause. Behind the polished suits and flawless lines were long, quiet evenings where he sat alone, listening to the echo of his own voice in an empty room. By the 1980s, the Statler Brothers had become an American country icon. But with hundreds of shows each year and the constant pressure to stay perfect, Harold began to wear down. He was the man who made everyone laugh, yet at times he laughed the least. In his journal, he once wrote, "There are nights when I smile, simply because I have to." Then came the real storm in 1982. Lew DeWitt, their longtime companion and the group's sweet tenor voice, was forced to step away due to chronic Crohn's disease. Harold fell silent, not only because they lost a singer, but because he had lost a brother who had sung beside him since the very beginning. The group carried on, bringing in a young talent, Jimmy Fortune, and it was Harold who first encouraged him. "Don't try to be Lew. Just be yourself. I'll take care of the rest." On television, Harold still smiled, still cracked jokes, still made America laugh. But friends would later recall how, after every show, he would sit in silence for a long time. There was something different in his laughter, something warm, yet tinged with sorrow. Perhaps Harold understood better than anyone that behind glory lies the price of time, and that no artist escapes the loneliness that comes when the stage finally goes dark. When the Statler Brothers Show ended in the late 1990s, Harold could feel the winds shifting. Fans still adored them, but Nashville was changing. A wave of younger pop-infused country stars was taking over. In 2002, the group announced their retirement. On their final night, Harold stepped forward, microphone in hand, and said just one line: "Thank you for giving us a lifetime to sing for you." The crowd rose to their feet, and through tears, he smiled. After that night, Harold Reid never stepped onto a big stage again. But he didn't disappear. He returned to his family, his faith, and the quiet rhythm of life in Staunton, Virginia. And in that stillness, people began to see it clearly. Behind Harold Reid's laughter was a heart that had carried both the joy and the sorrow of an entire generation of American country music. After years of life on the road, Harold Reid returned to Staunton, where every street carried the echoes of his childhood. No more audiences, no more long tours, only the sound of the wind through the pines and the faint hum of an old guitar hanging in the living room. There, he rediscovered what mattered most: peace. By his side was Brenda Reid, the faithful wife who had walked with him through every chapter of his life. They married when Harold was still a poor young man, unknown to the world, and for nearly 6 decades, she never left his side, no matter the stage, no matter the crowd. While the world saw Harold shining under bright lights, Brenda was the gentle glow behind the curtain, the one who always reminded him, "There's no song sweeter than the laughter of our family." Harold was a man of family and faith. He believed that success meant nothing if there was no one to share it with. His children often said their father never spoke about fame. He only spoke about gratitude, gratitude for being alive, for being able to sing, and for being loved. Every Sunday morning, he sat in his familiar church pew, just as he did as a boy, quietly singing along to old hymns. Harold Reid lived simply, honestly, and by a clear philosophy. If music doesn't make someone smile or cry, then it means nothing at all. He stayed away from the noise of fame, never chased after the spotlight, and chose instead to be a decent man, on stage and off. Those who met Harold often said, "He made you feel warm with just a single sentence." With Don Reid, his brother, colleague, and lifelong companion, Harold was more than just the eldest. He was the heartbeat that kept their music alive. The two brothers never argued over fame or position. Harold always let Don stand in front while he took a quiet step back. And that single step backward became the strength that held the group together. When asked why he never wanted to be the one in the spotlight, Harold would simply smile and say, "Every choir needs someone to keep the time. That's enough for me." Perhaps it was this very way of living, with kindness and humility, that made Harold Reid the warm soul of American country music, a man who never sought fame, but devoted his life to bringing joy, laughter, and faith to others. Yet beyond that gentle spirit, the legacy he left behind for country music is what ensures that the name Harold Reid will live on for generations to come. When the stage lights fade, most are quickly forgotten. But for Harold Reid, that was never the case. The music he left behind doesn't just live in recordings. It lives in the memories of millions who once laughed, cried, and felt comforted by the sound of his voice. Throughout their career, the Statler brothers earned more than 3 Grammy Awards, 9 CMA Awards, and an astounding 48 Music City News Awards, a record number for any country group. They were inducted into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame in 2007 and the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2008, where Harold Reid's name now rests beside legends like Johnny Cash, the Oak Ridge Boys, and Alabama. But for Harold, awards were never the goal. He once said, "The best thing about glory is when it makes others happy, not when people remember your name." Harold Reid's influence spread further than anyone could have imagined. Country harmony groups that followed, the Oak Ridge Boys, Shenandoah, Diamond Rio, Home Free, all cited him as a pioneer of modern vocal harmony. His bass became the standard, a model of warmth, restraint, and sincerity. No need to overplay, no need to shout. One deep note from Harold was enough to tell listeners they were in a Statler Brothers song. To the fans, Harold Reid was more than a singer. He was a symbol of kindness and Southern laughter. At fan gatherings, he was always the first to start a conversation, asking about families, small-town stories, and ordinary lives. One fan once said, "Meeting Harold felt like seeing an old relative again. He didn't say much, but his eyes made you feel welcome." The Statler Brothers Show wasn't just entertainment. It was a pure reflection of American life in its time. Family, faith, friendship, and gratitude. Harold was the creative force behind the show's humor and tone, turning it into America's Sunday dinner for millions of households over nearly a decade. He made country music feel close, familiar, and human, turning laughter and music into a shared part of everyday life. Now, whenever someone plays Flowers on the Wall or Class of '57, you can still feel that deep bass somewhere, a resonance that never fades, like the heartbeat of a golden age. Because music may change, but the soul of Harold Reid will never fade away. After their farewell night in 2002, the Statler brothers officially closed a journey that had lasted nearly half a century. As the audience filed out, Harold Reid didn't linger behind the curtain as he used to. He simply looked around the stage and nodded softly. as if saying goodbye to an old friend. From that day on, he was no longer a performer. He became once again a husband, a father, and an ordinary man in the quiet town of Staunton. In the years after retirement, Harold chose a life of peace. He loved waking up early, sitting on his porch to watch the mist lift over the fields, and listening to the old Statler recordings. Not out of nostalgia, but out of gratitude for a life that had come full circle. No one ever heard him speak of fame with longing. He would simply tell Brenda, "We sang long enough to make people smile. That's enough." Harold's final years were simple and tender. Dinners with his wife, evenings reading the Bible, phone calls with Don, and the occasional letter he'd write back to fans who still sent their thanks. People said Harold never forgot anyone who had helped the group. He kept every letter, every photograph, and every note that said, "Thank you for singing that song for me," as if they were precious treasures. To Harold, gratitude was the highest form of fame. As he entered his 80s, Harold's health began to fade. He struggled with chronic illness and withdrew from public life. Yet even in frailty, his humor never left him. When friends called to ask how he was doing, he'd reply with a smile, "I'm fine. The Lord's just teaching me to sing a little slower." Those words made everyone laugh and quietly weep. On April 24, 2020, Harold Reid took his final breath in his hometown of Staunton. He passed peacefully, surrounded by family. When the news broke, all of America fell silent. Country radio stations replayed "Flowers on the Wall" as a final farewell. Through tears, Don Reid said, "From now on, every time I sing, I'll always hear his deep voice behind me." Harold Reid left behind no scandals, no fortune, only a legacy of music and kindness. He had lived fully, laughed deeply, sung wholeheartedly, and loved in his own quiet way. And sometimes, it's the ones who stand behind the lights who make the stage shine forever. After Harold Reid passed away, the town of Staunton grew unusually quiet. At the small church where he once sang as a boy, a simple wooden sign was hung. "Thank you, Harold, for teaching us to sing with our hearts. No flowers, no slogans, only sacred silence." And yet within that silence, people heard more clearly than ever. His deep bass voice still lingering, like a whisper that refused to fade. People often asked Don Reid, "Do you miss your brother?" He would smile softly and reply, "There's not a day I don't hear Harold's voice. It's in every song, in every laugh." That was the beauty of Harold Reid. He didn't just leave behind music. He left behind a way of living. A life built on sincerity and faith, where the voice and the heart were never apart. For Harold, fame was only a short verse in the long song called Life. In one of his rare interviews, he once said, "Music will always change, but if you sing with kindness, people will remember you." And they did. People remembered Harold not because he was famous, but because he made them feel good about remembering themselves. His legacy wasn't pressed in gold records. It lived quietly in the hearts of those who listened. If he could have said one final thing, perhaps it would have been the simplest of all. Thank you for listening. Nothing more, nothing less. Because all his life, Harold sang for others, and their listening was his greatest reward. Harold Reid left with a smile, believing that music never truly ends. When one voice falls silent, another begins. When one generation passes, the next will sing the same old songs. And in that way, music becomes an endless circle of grace. "A man may leave the stage," he once said, "but if he ever sang with his heart, his music will stay with the world forever." Now, whenever Class of '57 plays, People don't just remember a band. They remember the man who stood in the back row, the one who kept the rhythm, the faith, and the soul of country music alive. And somewhere in the quiet skies over Virginia, you can almost see Harold Reid, smiling softly, listening to the song of his own life play once more. Night falls over Nashville. The stage of the Grand Ole Opry lies silent, like an old dream. A lone microphone stands beneath a soft golden light. No laughter, no deep bass voice of Harold Reid. Only an open space where the music still seems to breathe. They say, when a song ends, only silence remains. But for Harold Reid, even that silence carried a rhythm. The rhythm of gratitude, of brotherhood, and of the honest, simple years of country music. The songs he left behind never faded. They simply changed form, living on in the memories of those who once listened, laughed, and wept with him. From Flowers on the Wall to Class of '57, Harold Reid walked through an entire lifetime of music. But what endured wasn't the fame or the trophies. It was the way he made people feel. He wasn't the man in the spotlight. And yet, that's exactly why he became the softest light in the hearts of those who listened. Picture this. An empty room, an old microphone, and somewhere a faint, deep bass humming like a breath. That isn't just music. That's Harold Reid, the man who kept the rhythm for a generation, who turned laughter into part of the harmony, and who made country music warmer than ever before. Time can take away the stage, but it can never take the soul of someone who sang from the heart. Because every time someone plays an old record and that low voice drifts in from afar, Harold Reid is still there, in the audience's smile, in the southern breeze, and in the hearts that have never forgotten. If you've ever laughed or teared up listening to the Statler Brothers, leave a word of remembrance for Harold Reid, the man who kept the music from ever losing its rhythm. Because sometimes, the ones who stand behind the lights are the very ones who keep the stage forever bright. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this journey, for remembering Harold Reid, the man who kept time for an entire golden age of country music. If you love stories about legendary country artists, please like this video to let us know your heart still beats in rhythm with the old country sound. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so we can travel together through more timeless stories, where every voice and every memory is a living piece of America's musical soul. Every like, every comment from you is a tribute to those who sang with all their hearts. Thank you for listening. And if one night you hear a deep voice echoing from afar, know that Harold Reid is still smiling, keeping the rhythm for us all.